Good morning, everyone. Very much better. So you can see my law professor role coming out right away. So I want to join the judge in welcoming you here and do a brief introduction to what we're trying to do, introduce the panelists, and then get started. The judge laid out the importance of the topic. I'm not repeating him. This is the first of the town halls on this subject that the Coalition on Racial and Ethnic Justice is going to host. Those of you who came here from other places, if you have ideas for other places, talk to me after or talk to Wes after the proceeding and share that with us. This is a big project. This is a big topic, and the ABA and this group is focused on two particular pieces of it. I'm not saying we're not interested in other pieces, but we're focused on two particular pieces of it. One is trying to come to an understanding of the role that implicit bias plays in getting us to the situation we're in, not explicit bias, where I say I'm biased against a handicapped person, but where implicitly I react in a biased or discriminatory way and don't mean it. So that's the first question we're interested in. And the second is, not surprisingly, we are at the ABA, the role of lawyers and law students in helping to address the problem. And I want to quickly say that none of us think lawyers and law students are the solution, capital T-H-E. We just think we might have a small bit to contribute to improving the situation. So we're focused on those two questions and also on the opportunity to bring people together who might not otherwise always get to talk to each other about work that's going on this question. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order they're going to speak, and then once the panel has spoken, we'll have a few general questions and then open the mic to folks in the audience. And I see a good number of folks I know and love, so I know what to expect from you, but I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone here about their perspective on this. We have a lot to learn. So the first speaker is the Reverend Jeanette Wilson, sitting here closest to me, senior advisor to National Rainbow Push Coalition here in Chicago. And then after that, we start on the other end with Nancy Heitzig, a professor of sociology and critical race studies from St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Rob Sanook from his law offices in Miramar, Florida. Dr. Artika Tyner from the Community Justice Project. She's also the director of diversity at the University of St. Thomas School of Law in Minneapolis. Mariam Kaba, the founding director of Project NIA here in Chicago, and Julie Beal, director of Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern here in Chicago. So there is a little bit of method. If you were listening carefully, you'd hear it. We're looking for some inspiration from you, Jeanette. And then we are going to hear an overview of the topic from Nancy and an overview of some interesting new possible approaches and solutions from Artika around our restorative justice. And then we have local area Chicago folks who are going to talk about the work they're doing, the issues they see here in Chicago. So with that, I'm swapping seats with you. Or places.
Good morning. You all really need to have a little bit more energy. Good morning. Good morning. I know it's slightly early, but it's 9 o'clock. If you were teaching in any of our schools today, one of the things that teachers have to do is to provide energy at 7 o'clock a.m. for high school students who have first period classes. And so while I know some of you have not had all of the coffee and caffeine you need, just think about the students that we expect to be energized, focused, and ready to respond. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, this is a topic that I have worked with for a number of years in various capacities. In one of my prior lives, I was assigned with the task of truancy and attendance at the Chicago Public Schools. And then later, I was forced to lead what they call school climate interventions, visiting those. They would send me to the schools where the problems were occurring to stabilize the environment. One of the things that I noticed as I spent time, whether it was in elementary school or in a high school, there was this sense of removing young people from classrooms quickly, effectively, and in the high school setting, the favorite word was security. And so when you enter our buildings, there is this Gestapo-type environment that permeates the school system. You can't get in all of the doors. There's no welcoming experience approaching any of our schools. And then once you are in the building, there's this search and seizure procedure that greets you at the front door. The amount of money that our school systems spend on the policing of children as opposed to the counseling of children is one of the things that leads to this push out. Now, in Chicago, and I can speak to that very specifically, there are several causes to this push out, zero tolerance environment. First of all, you have inexperienced teachers. You have this new movement around the nation where we are going to fix the classrooms by bringing in younger, inexperienced teachers faster, with all kinds of creative ideas, and at no point have they learned the art of classroom management. So now you have a person like I was when I first taught in a Catholic school. I was 21 years old. I was in a high school setting, and they were all boys. They were within 4 years of my age. I was standing at the podium one morning. I was teaching science, and I felt something on my hand. I thought it was a mouse because I was teaching biology, even though my major was chemistry. This kid was rubbing my hand because, I'm the only female other than the religion teacher in the building. And so I had not experienced the idea of a student having a crush on a teacher. And I mean, he was real focused, and and I'm like, don't touch me. And I never told him my last name because I had been around older teachers. There's this inexperienced teacher in the classroom. You have the Gestapo meeting you at the door, and then you have students who enter the building with issues that will never be addressed. A significant number of our children have parents who live in prison. You go to county jail, everybody there has a child. So if my mother is behind bars, my father is behind bars, and I may never have met him, there's no sense of family. And you have many children not even living with relatives. They just live with people that they know or have met. That enters the building. So I don't have breakfast it's not the Leave It to Beaver generation. It's not what you see on television. It's more like Beavis and Butthead or The Family, that little crazy cartoon. So there's no structured environment from which many of our young people leave, going into a building that is hostile when they get there, and it prepares them for the place that is waiting for them. The school is generally not clean. It is not organized in the public school systems unless you are gifted and you test out of that. Your neighborhood school is not the place you want to go to. It's not generally looking much better than where you left home. And so you have that context. The child, when they enter the building itself, there's no social worker there if I have a problem. There's no counselor available to me. We have counseling once or twice a week in elementary school, and they primarily are assigned to the special needs students. So the regular students who may have some emotional issues that have occurred at home, they're not being addressed. So you have rampant, uncontrolled school challenges all day long. Principals are spending time with paperwork for the central office, which has no relationship to education or to the management of those classrooms where students live. And then you have school districts that are allowed to make decisions about school discipline on an arbitrary and capricious way. Children that attend inner city public schools have a different discipline code than children that attend charter schools, children that attend the more affluent public school districts like Neuqua Valley. There's a disparity in the allocation of resources to schools. Inner city schools spend more money on security and discipline, less money on coaches, counseling, and things that would engage children. Inner city schools spend less money on those activities that teach young people how to engage in teamwork, how to work together in sports, art, and music. That's removed from most elementary schools. So now you have a group of young people who, if you ask them, and I'm sure in future programs we should have a panel of young people, if you ask them, why are the discipline problems so great, they have no adult in the building that they trust, that they will give information to before a crisis occurs. And so you have this pot boiling all day long in buildings, and then you have untrained, insensitive at times security guards who are policing children. Now, it is against this backdrop that you have limited parental involvement, parents have to work, or parents are disengaged from the school system. How many of you are parents? How many of you ever visited your child's school? How many of you felt welcome when you went? I hated going. I used to tell my daughter, do not make me have to come up there. Because they're hostile, and I worked for the system. There's a clerk that's trying to drink coffee or eat a donut that does not want to be interrupted when you get to the door. Yep. You know, because we had to sign the late notices. I'm like, don't be late, because I'm not going to have to go through that and be disrespected at the front door. Well, if those of us in the room don't feel comfortable, just think about people who don't even understand the system, who really have limited educational achievements. And so it's an imposing negative environment. This push out, however, is based on, I believe, the idea of our country to increase the prison population. It is racist, and it is calculated, and it is not accidental. Children are pushed into the jail system through the juvenile system into the adult system very strategically in our schools. They build these cases against them. Most of the time, they start out with a nonviolent, really minor offense at school. The child says a curse word to a teacher. The teacher, however, responds with a curse word as well. That is not recorded in the report. It is the child that is now placed in a disciplinary situation. Most schools don't have in-school suspension, so now you send me home. There's no one there. So you send me to freedom. You send me to act a fool. And the constant referral, if you suspend me for 5 days, it is much easier for me to never return than to go back. That is the context of this struggle. And so I would recommend, one, that we need the surrogate, if you will, parent that places him or herself in the school environment to make sure that the school climate is one that is welcoming and acceptable. I think also there has to be uniform discipline codes. There should not be one set of rules for public schools in Inglewood and in Lawndale and a different set of discipline rules based on a school in Neuqua Valley, as if one group of students are expected to behave one way and another group is expected to behave a different way. And then you have Illinois versus other states competing. And so as we think about and wrestle with the solutions, we must always understand the context of poverty that drives some of the behaviors, the context of unequal funding that drives the response of the system, and then the misappropriation and the misallocation of the limited resources that do exist in a manner that forces a child to see themselves fitting into a criminal system as opposed into a corrective and encouraging system. And so I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
just quickly, before we go on to our next speaker, as you can tell, this program is about the future. These are children, and we're trying to put this program on to take care of issues that are happening now, really impacting the future of our society. And what's great is to know that the ABA is here. We're willing to work to make sure that these students have a future. And what's even better is in the audience is our unopposed president-elect candidate, Paulette Brown, and she's here as well. So we just want to acknowledge her and thank her for coming and supporting this program. I just wanted to let you know that the ABA is behind this program and what we're doing. And so we have a home for the work that we're doing. And with that, we'd like to continue on. Go ahead.
So Nancy?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much to the ABA. I'm really pleased to be here, and let me reiterate really my gratitude that you are considering this issue and wrestling with this issue. Thank you, Reverend Wilson. The context. I'm a sociologist, so I always like us to go back to big picture, and I know a lot of you are concerned with solutions that will be about wrestling with the law, and that's a key part of this, but bigger context. Yes, school-to-prison pipeline is a phenomenon that is deeply connected to mass incarceration in the United States. I agree with Reverend Wilson that it's an intentional attempt to feed bodies into the prison system. I think it's also complicated here and complicated in the schools by a simultaneous medicalization, and I think one of the reasons that we see racial disparity in school discipline is that there's a medical model which mitigates white misbehavior, okay? So it's primarily white kids who are getting attention deficit activity disorder and other diagnoses that spare them from, the harsh disciplinary consequences of zero tolerance, which I'll say more about in a minute. Implicit bias, and this is a big, complicated topic that hopefully we'll get to in the discussion, but certainly I think that persistent media representations of crime and criminals, and in particular the criminalization of blackness, feeds into the everyday interactions that teachers have with their students in the schools. So all of this is happening in that bigger context. It's also happening in a context of a number of issues with education, growing poverty rates and declining school funding, resegregation of schools by race and class, and we do have a preponderance of white teachers. In fact, 83% of teachers are white women. So how does that shape implicit bias and decisions around discipline at school? We see persistent underrepresentation of students of color in advanced placement and AP courses, and we see overrepresentation of them in special education tracks. And we're going to see a little bit later on that that very much intersects with who's suspended and expelled. High-stakes testing has really complicated this. It's increased pressures on teachers. It's allowed teachers in many cases to use zero-tolerance policies to push out underperforming students and maintain their test scores. And of course, the biggest context of all of this for us legally is the reliance on zero-tolerance policies and the presence of police in schools. People have been talking about school-to-prison pipeline, schoolhouse, jailhouse, cradle-to-prison pipeline, whatever we want to refer to it for, 15 odd years now. And a lot we could say about that, but in a nutshell, it really is about the blurring of any kind of distinctions between school as an educational institution and legal systems, whether they're juvenile justice or adult criminal justice systems. I think it's important to say, too, that Students are both indirectly routed into the pipeline via suspension and expulsion, and they're increasingly directly sent there via the growing presence of police in the schools. The big background legal framework of all of this, and I'm just going to mention this briefly now because I think any remedy is ultimately going to have to go back and address the Gun-Free School Act and the Safe School Act of 1994 because they create the larger legal framework which gives rise to zero tolerance policies in the school. And in a nutshell, we're really talking about the rhetoric of the war on drugs, of mandatory minimum, of zero tolerance, of no discretion, as translated into educational policy around discipline. By the late 1990s, and this is partly ironically enough in response to school shootings in largely white suburban schools, we see additional legislation which encourages funding for a police presence in the hallway, the Gestapo, which Reverend Wilson refers to. And so now we have schools that very much represent correctional environments. One of the things that we see, and is really the backdrop for a growing number of civil rights concerns here, is that this kind of surveillance presence, police presence, is disproportionately in some schools, that is inner city schools, majority of student of color schools, as opposed to others. And what we see is then, and I'll say a little bit more about this, and certainly everyone on the panel is going to speak to this, is that there is disparity, or, well, I'll just say discrimination, then in who is suspended and who is expelled. And it's disproportionately students of color. It is disproportionately students with disabilities. And there's a growing body of literature that suggests that LGBTQ students are also increasingly targeted by these policies. Quick little overview of the consequences here, which everybody's going to speak to. What we've seen consistently since the implementation of zero tolerance is about 3 million suspensions every year, and that number has, continued to rise. We've seen elevated rates of students dropping out, and that some of that is indirect. You're suspended, you're expelled, you're excluded from school, you're disencouraged, as it would, to participate in education. We also see growing body of research that talks about students being pushed out, and this is often in correlation with high-stakes testing. A lot of research in education is talking about how zero tolerance is used to lose, quote unquote, the students that are dragging down the test scores. Number of legal and constitutional questions here, and I think this is particularly around police presence in the school. Are there violations of search and seizure? You probably all know that a case went to the Supreme Court maybe 4 years ago around strip searches in the schools in the context of zero tolerance policies. Questions about Miranda. Number of legal questions about the rights of students at school, which is increasingly a quasi-legal environment. The big set of questions probably that have driven much conversation is about demographic disparity in who is suspended and expelled. Race and ethnicity is the big factor, gender matters, sexual orientation, and ability. Just one quick look here at racial disparity. And this has been the impetus for, finally the first time in 20 years now, a different conversation from the Department of Education and the Department of Justice, new guidelines, and this is largely in response to race. We see that black students in particular have been suspended and expelled at 3.5 times the rate of whites. In states like mine, Minnesota, that's 6 times, and 70% of school arrests involve Black and Latino students. I'm just going to put this up because this is going to guide the conversation. One of the important opportunities that I think we have today is that we're having this conversation in the context of brand new guidelines from the Department of Education in the context of a joint position statement from Department of Justice, new guiding principles for school discipline and school climate, and this is really the first time in 20 years that there's been a federal message that we must move away from zero tolerance on suspension and expulsion and must consider that as a last resort. So, opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to thank both our first 2 speakers for really setting a great stage for the rest of the program. And before we get to Rob, I'd like to ask everyone to be sure they signed in. So if you didn't, there'll be paper circulating. We'd like to be able to connect folks after this meeting to each other. So please leave your contact information if you haven't already. Rob?
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I think it's a testament to our interest or concern about this topic that this room is filled. I mean, it's filled to the point where extra chairs had to be brought in. And as somebody who participates regularly on various panels dealing with diversity issues, I can tell you that we very rarely get this type of an interest, which is exciting. And it's my hope that after we're done talking today that you're all energized and charged to then take what you've heard here and go get active and help take the steps that are necessary to change this system. I am Native American. I grew up on the Eastern Cherokee Indian Reservation in North Carolina. And my perspective here today is that dealing with the Native American education population and tribal education. In the packet, there's a lot of statistics, but I will say that Native Americans are the best at being the worst when it comes to these statistics. And by that I mean that nationally, although we have over 600,000 students in the education pipeline, only about 44% of those actually graduate from high school and go on to any post-secondary education. And in that post-secondary group, only about 1% complete that post-secondary education. And a lot of that stems from the unique cultural aspects of tribal members. And of the 600,000 students, about 30% attend what would be called typically reservation high schools. Those are high schools that are located within tribal reservations and are funded by the federal government through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Education Department. Unfortunately, the federal government funds Indian programs last and cuts them first on every level. A perfect example is the Affordable Care Act. As a Native American, we are exempt from the Affordable Care Act, so because Indian Health Services are supposed to provide funding for it, but Indian Health Services is not funded, so you're still uninsurable. And it's a continual problem. And on a reservation, you add to that lack of funding the unique cultural aspects. I can give you, for instance, in Arizona, where a tribal child was actually attending a non-Indian school, a traditional school. A teacher singled him out for getting a great grade on a piece of paper, got 100%, and brought him to the front of the class and stood him up and paraded him for the class to see, which normally that would be an awesome, accomplishment. But for the culture of the Navajo, being singled out as being better than everybody else is a strict taboo. So that child intentionally failed all the rest of his tests so he would never be brought to the front of the class ever again, and then eventually dropped out of school and didn't finish his education. So cultural sensitivity plays a huge role in that process. And not only cultural sensitivity, but the implicit bias that comes from the lack of understanding or familiarity with the tribal culture. In 2006, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against the Winter School District in South Dakota based on a 10 or 20 years of a continual mistreatment of Native American students who were being serviced by the Winter School District. They found that over a 5-year period, in spite of thousands of racial complaints and ethnic slurs, only 2 non-Indian students had ever been called to task for belittling or damaging or making fun of Native American students who were attending the school. Yesterday I spoke briefly about, at a different panel on diversity, about the school mascot issue and how it seems to be kind of in the forefront right now. But as you talk about Native American education, the reality is you have children going to schools that have mascots that belittle their culture and their history. So you have, whether it's the Redskins or the Braves or however you, the Squaws, whatever it might be, the tribal members who attend those non-Indian schools are then brought up in an environment where it's acceptable to demean or belittle them. And then after a while, that continual message carries over to the other students that makes the entire episode very, very difficult to continue in the educational process. And I said yesterday during the panel that, to understand the term Redskin, and as a Native American, I played football and I played in college and I had a bunch of teammates that went to the Redskins team. I love the Washington Redskins. They're a great team. And I just didn't realize the impact that it had because I think we get numb sometimes. We see it happening and it's become so accepted in our language and in our day-to-day life that we just gloss over and think it can't be that big a deal. And then I realized, I started to understand the term Redskin and how it originated from the bounties that were placed on tribal members' heads, where the goal was to have the blood drain down their faces, and that gave them the red skins. And they were paying, $50 for any man over 12, and $20 for any boy or girl under 12 if you would bring them a scalp of a child. And that was, that was $9,000 in today's dollars, which is a lot of money. The incentive was there. So it has a very personal context for tribal members, and instead of seeing us moving away from that and becoming more sensitive, the unique nature of the tribal culture, if you look at the Constitution, it only recognizes 4 governments. You've got federal, state, foreign, and tribal. So tribal members we have dual citizenship. We are citizens of our tribe. I am a citizen of the Eastern Cherokee Nation. I'm also a citizen of the United States. And that cultural aspect creates a lot of difficulty for teachers and educators, and more importantly, the Gestapo. I like the Gestapo. That's going to become the new moniker, the Gestapo tactics. But what's troubling in the Native American community is that the lack of funding has now almost created a pipeline for failure, because the teachers who are coming to the reservations, they're not bad teachers, but they're grossly underpaid. So it's those who usually can't find jobs elsewhere, who are unable to find positions, and they're just trying to find time between this job and the next place they can go on to. So very rarely do you have a teacher who stays in the system of tribal education more than 2 or 3 years. And I think my life growing up, and I was very fortunate, I had good parental support and a great opportunity with teachers who stayed with me. My 3rd grade teacher and I are still friends to this day, and I'm a very old man, so I don't look old. Look at she's saying time. But it's okay. But the important aspect of, I think, all of this today that we talk about is there is, I say tribal culture, but all of us bring to the education system, our children do, who we are individually. And there seems to be a disconnect between the educators wanting to know about the students and their lives and their families, and the families wanting to tell and be a part of that system, that if that gap can be bridged, and we're made more aware of how we act and talk and deal with these things, it might make it much better. I know that today, the things I did in high school, if I did them today, I would not be an attorney. And there's absolutely no way. And I currently have a young man who's got a felony charge for hurling a projectile or missile out of a school bus. He threw a pen out the window of the school bus and it hit a car. And he gets arrested and goes to prison and waits for me to come get him out at 14 years old. And I think back to my life, and I'm sure some of you could probably give some similar stories. There's this Gestapo idea that we have to police instead of care for children is just the wrong approach. And I think we need to get back to the basics of community, desire to strengthen each other by cultural understanding, and that will help bridge that gap and maybe correct this curve and direct it the other way. Thanks. Sorry I went over.
Artika?
Good morning. Well, for my background, I'm a civil rights attorney. I teach at the Community Justice Project, which is in Minnesota, at the University of St. Thomas School of Law. But for me, I think I had a transformational moment in 2007. My mom came home and said, "You have to read this." So a gift from moms, I said I have to get started. So this is a publication from the Children's Defense Fund, which is called the Cradle to Prison Pipeline. This is a 2007 edition, but they offer annual updates, and I would highly recommend obtaining a copy of the report. For me, it was a transformational moment because I initially had prepared myself to become a high school English teacher. And then I said, when I was doing my student teaching, I'm not sure if this is for me. I was dealing with a complication at the intersections of race and poverty. I had children who were homeless. I had children who didn't know where their next meal would come from. And a lot of those issues played out in the role of disciplinary issues. But still yet, I didn't see the full framework. All I made was a commitment to become an attorney because I said the law is a language of power. Let me understand that knowledge to be able to empower my community. So in 2007, when I received this report, one of the things that stood out to me was even the image on the front. I know it might be hard for some of you to see in the back, but it's a young man being booked into this cradle to prison pipeline. He's standing on a milk crate. He wasn't even tall enough for his booking to get his fingerprints. And as I started to read, it was one of those things I just couldn't put down, to hear that there were over 2 million children incarcerated in juvenile detention facilities across the nation, that a black boy born in 2001 had a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison in his lifetime, a Latino boy, 1 in 6 chance. I said that could be my nephew or my own son. And at that point, I had to make a commitment, and Marian Wright Edelman had always served as a source of inspiration for me as the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, and actually she coined the notion and framework for No Child Left Behind, but not related to an educational issue. It was kind of hijacked under the Bush administration, but truly related to promoting better outcomes for children. So as I started to get more inspired by her work, one quote that stood out to me is that I either had to stand up for children or I didn't stand for much. So I made a commitment to make that stand, and that was the direction our clinic and our work went in pursuing civil rights for children. So that just gives you a backdrop of who I am and how I got involved in this issue. And at that point, I said, I have to take some steps to really look at how do we dismantle this pipeline and what is my role. So in starting in what is the school to prison pipeline, I just wanted to give us a working definition. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund describes it as this funneling of students out of school and into the streets, and the juvenile correction system perpetuates a cycle known as the school to prison pipeline, depriving children and youth of meaningful opportunities for education, future employment, and participation in our democracy. As you heard already, it's a question of what will our future look like? How will we protect the rights of our children, and how will we support opportunities for them not only to learn, but to strive and also thrive in our world? However, lo and behold, I, like many, had many myths about what that meant. For instance, I didn't have a sense of what Nancy talked about mass incarceration. In my community, I just looked around and said, maybe it's just circumstantial. Maybe just something went wrong. But as I started to see this design of it, with more than 2 million people being incarcerated in our prisons and having the highest incarceration rate in the world, I had to say, pause, start looking at this, start deconstructing it. And actually, as a civil rights professor, I have to pause here anyway and give us just a tidbit to frame the conversation as well. I think we also have to critically look at ourselves as lawyers. As we look at May 17th, will be the celebration of the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. How would we progress related to some of the racial disparities that we see in the classroom? And I think with that, we have to lend ourselves to our dear friend Charles Hamilton Houston, who said, a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. I hope we don't fall in the latter category and we think about some critical solutions to this very issue. So if we look at this, I like to characterize this idea of mass incarceration as a tangled web. Because oftentimes we can see all the different entry points, but the difficulty is, how do you exit a web? There's only few exit points. And the challenge then becomes for our children, how do they get out of this web once they're tangled in? And in particular, what stood out to me, a missing piece of this analysis as well, oftentimes we tell young people, don't worry about a juvenile record. It's not a big deal. Once you turn 18, poof, it's gone. But in the state of Minnesota, your criminal record as a young person can be accessible up to the age of 28, depending on the context of the record. So we also have to make sure that we're looking at that we're mortgaging our children's futures by criminalizing their behavior in the classroom. So just in simple terms, children enter into the juvenile justice system in one of two ways: through an interaction with a police officer in the community, or secondly, through the schools. Back home in Minnesota, about 20% of the cases in the juvenile justice system are referred from schools. So I had to look critically at this. Then, is it then becoming that the pathway from the classroom for disciplinary issues and that is then becoming one of those entry points in that tangled web? And I think the answer that we have to conclude is definitely yes. So two of the factoring issues that I'll just talk about just briefly are our school disciplinary policies. Nationally, a public school student is suspended every second and a half. So we have to look at those numbers. I know Nancy already talked about it's 3.3 million children who are suspended annually in the United States. We just had Super Bowl Sunday that will cover all the NFL stadiums combined to give us a sense of how many students is 3.3 million. But here's where my civil rights lens had to come into the analysis to specifically look at African American students. So a black public school student is suspended every 4 seconds. And although black students make up only 18% of students in public schools in 2009-2010 year, they were 40% of students who received 1 or more days out of school suspension. And then here's another aspect of it that's oftentimes missed as well. One study found that 95% of these out-of-school suspensions for African American children and children of color were for nonviolent minor disruptions such as tardiness or disrespect. So a part of the analysis is then looking at dispelling some of the myths related to behavior of children in schools, especially related to zero tolerance. With less than 1% of violent crimes happening on school grounds, how do we answer these questions of the disproportionate rate of referrals? And then lastly, as we look at this through a civil rights lens, and I'll conclude with this point, there are two frameworks. We have Title IV, which prohibits discrimination based upon race and national origin, and then Title VI, that then says that any school, which is an educational institution that receives federal funding, is prohibited from engaging in discrimination. So I will go on once we get into the dialogue on how we can look at this from a civil rights lens to help promote equity in the classroom and our disciplinary practices as well. The last thing I will say in bringing Dr. King in this conversation, he said one of the most tragic things is to sleep during a revolution. And I think this is revolutionary times. We can no longer allow this pipeline to expand. We can no longer allow things to continue the way that they have. So my hope is that we can band together as lawyers, as social engineers, to say we can make a difference. This is wrong and it must stop.
Thank you. So I want to highlight one point before we go on. I think it's significant for us to explicitly say that these big disproportionalities that we're seeing and that everybody's been talking about when studied with more care and drilling down into the information are not because these children are worse behaved. They're not, that's not the reason. And so part of this conversation is to see that reason, to understand the way discretion among the 85% white teachers plays out, to get that bigger picture. But I want to explicitly say this is not about kids being bad and therefore being suspended. Yeah.
All right. So, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Those of you who are not from Chicago, welcome to our lovely city where we're freezing ourselves to death in probably the worst winter we've had in a while. So, yeah, yay for you here in Chicago. I'm going to ask that folks who are taking photos, please don't, because I hate them, and also it's super distracting to me, so yeah, no photos. I'm going to talk today about kind of the work we're doing here in Chicago specifically. I run an organization called Project NIA. Our interest and our focus is on eradicating youth incarceration. We're on track to do that next month. You can all be happy to hear. So I'll be closing up shop and going back to teaching in the classroom soon. So, you know, what we do really is to try to intervene in various ways. And part of the way is to interrupt this kind of funneling of children from school to prison. But I also want to say that it's important to understand that schools can't do everything. and that schools aren't the main places necessarily where inequalities are cemented, that it comes before school, and that it's almost a misnomer in some cases to talk about a school-to-prison pipeline, and we should probably be talking about a community-to-prison pipeline or a cradle-to-prison pipeline. It starts even before young people enter the school building, and schools reflect our society in broader ways, right? So in Chicago, we know that last year we had over 4,200 school-based arrests. Chicago has about 42% of the students who attend school are African American, and we had 76% of the arrests, so were of black students. So when you think about disproportionality or targeting, you see the very big disproportionality. You also see that for Latino students, who are also about 42% of the CPS system, they're being arrested at much lower rates than their proportion, right? So they're about 20% of the school-based arrests. So often we also talk about black-brown issues, and depending on the state that you're in, that may be true. In Illinois, it's a black issue. It's a black issue around suspension, it's a black issue around arrest, and we should say that clearly, because there's an actual anti-blackness factor here that is playing itself out in systems, and if we can't name it, we can't solve it. Our kids that we work with, the young people we work with, hate school and have grown to hate school. They used to like it at some point, and really, as they got older and got treated and stigmatized certain ways, started to loathe going to school. And I always just talk about our schools often being places of fear and loathing, and that plays itself out in various ways. Fear of our children. People are scared to death of black kids, and including black people. And that's about anti-blackness being internalized, right? And young people sense your fear and loathing of them, and they react accordingly. And so I see a lot of that happening and playing itself out in our spaces. You should also be aware of the fact that 84% of the arrests that are happening in our schools here in Chicago are misdemeanor offenses that really could be solved without having to have the police be intervening at all. It's the fact that we have 2 police officers stationed at minimum in every single high school in this city that puts things that would have been taken care of in the principal's office now become criminalized and put into the police's purview. If a police officer is in a school building, they are going to be the police. Like, that's their job, is to, be the police. It's not their job to be a counselor for your kids. And I think we're really, kind of conflating that and making that into their jobs. That's not their jobs. And I'm going to tell you, I have friends who are cops who rather be solving murders. They don't want to be arresting children for being disobedient or, getting into a tantrum. That's not the hope that why they went into becoming cops, So I think we have to start to reframe and think about policing in schools totally differently. And start frankly, just pulling cops out of schools. So one of the main things that we do and work on is restorative practices and restorative justice. We ran a peace room at our local school for 2 years, where we were there as community members, having trained people in restorative practices to help them be able to have an alternative to suspension, expulsion, and arrest. And what we wanted to do was to be a presence in that school, which was a school that was sending a lot of children into our system, both into the police system and also into the court system. There were lots of problems with our presence in the school, a huge amount of challenges, which we can talk about in the question segment if people are interested in. We also wrote about that experience in a chapter in a book called Dismantling the School-to-Prison Pipeline, which was published in 2012 by the Harvard Education Review. So if you want a more in-depth, kind of thoughtful consideration of the role of having these kinds of restorative practices, which a lot of people, now that's like the new thing, that's the silver bullet, everybody do restorative practice, what, yeah, we're gonna do people don't even know what the hell it means, but it sounds like they should be really for it, and we don't want that many people for it, because anytime a lot of people are for something, including state's attorneys, then that's not gonna be good for us, It just isn't, and I'm, sorry for the state's attorneys and prosecutors in the room, but that's true, There's just a different mindset. Restorative practice is not meant to mainly be legal. And now it's what it is. And that's really problematic on so many levels. And I'm talking to a bunch of lawyers here, right? But that's really problematic. And we can talk more about that later. So I'm going to just end by saying that for us here in Chicago, we've been fighting for many, many years to change our discipline policies, which have now finally begun to change, to take zero tolerance out of the school policy book, which now has happened. We've also been fighting to have less and less and less arrests. And so we've actually had a 23% decrease in decline in school arrests since 2010. We were at 8,000 school arrests a year. Last year we were at 4,200. You know, that doesn't just happen. That happens because of on-the-ground parents in schools who are fighting, community members who are fighting, people who are saying, no, you're not going to incarcerate our children at these rates, and no more anti-blackness. We're calling you on it, right? So, you know, resistance matters, struggle matters, calling people out matters, telling the truth matters. So I hope that we continue to do those things. Thanks.
Julie?
Yeah, hi, I'm Julie Beal, and it's always hard to go after my friend Mary McCabe. But the good news is that she's eradicating incarceration, which means I don't have to work anymore.
Exactly.
So I just lost my job, and I can move to a warmer climate. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for coming to Chicago in our freezing cold weather. I am Julie Beal, and I'm the director of the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern Law School. So I run a legal clinic, which is why I was asked to come here. But as a threshold matter, I want to say that my clinic is not the clinic that focuses on this. We have Miranda Johnson here, who actually does focus on this issue at Loyola. But I'd like to tell you, and I applaud them, and I think as a thing for this audience, I want to say that there's a real access to justice issue that every lawyer should take seriously, and that is that our kids, I'm sure it's around the country, although I only can speak for what happens in Chicago because it's the only community I know, kids are being expelled without lawyers.
That's right.
So you're all lawyers, we can talk about a lot of different things, but every person should be taking a case of a child who's being expelled from school. That's just what I mean, if I say nothing else, I think that's the most important thing I want to say to you. I think because at the Children and Family Justice Center, we believe, and I think all of you, I hope, agree with us, that no child's disobedience should be punished by not going to school. I mean, think about it. That's what we do. We say you're not behaving, so we're going to take away the thing that is most important, or one of the most important things, for these children. And I think that happened, the kind of work that we do, which is not expulsion cases, unfortunately, because we've lost funding for our educational lawyer. So again, if you all have money and want to fund an educational fellow at Northwestern Juvenile Clinic, we'd be happy to do it because it is something that we should be focusing on primarily and not the way that I'm going to describe. The way that I'm going to describe it is education is in every single one of our cases. We represent children who are facing criminal cases. I'll tell you the story of a young man. I'm not going to tell you his name. Let's just call him Johnny. He had been abused when he was in a foreign country and had come to our country to get asylum. He was completely traumatized. He also was special education. So he became a ward of our state, and he was placed in a special education school. So they knew that he was traumatized. They had an IEP. They had all the information they needed to know about this child. So you know the badges that you're all wearing that say ABA, whatever? So kids at these schools wore them. So he misbehaved, whatever, in a hallway, and the teacher came up to him in his face and pulled his badge off, okay? For a kid, if you study trauma, that was really not a good choice. So he exploded and threw the chair that was sitting next to him, okay, in the hallway, and it ricocheted off the wall and hit a teacher. Felony criminal charge, people. So this kid, 17-year-old now, thank you, because we changed the law in Illinois as of January 1st, but it was a few years ago. 17 years old, spending time in prison, a felony charge for the rest of his life. It's just horrible. So we represent him, yes, and now he has fines, and guess what? Did he go back to school? Let's just raise your hand if you think he went back to school. Right. He didn't go back to school. So you see, we represent kids in that situation. We represent kids, now listen to this. This is the biggest hypocrisy. I can't tolerate it. So we represent kids who are on parole, okay, in our state, or on probation. If they fail to go to school, guess what happens? They get revoked. They get sent back to our prison system, which she's eradicating, thank goodness, but where we don't educate them, where we don't have teachers.
Right.
it makes me crazy on a daily basis to think that a kid is their parole order says you must go to school, you don't go to school, we send you back to prison where we don't educate you. I am sorry, I find that appalling, and I'm trying to eradicate that. So I'm working on that. We also see young people who want to go to school. They're here for asylum, because we do a lot of asylum work for young people. They go to the school and their teachers, the council say, sorry, you're not going to graduate in time. There's no reason for you to come here. I can't understand that, but that goes back to the point about, I guess, the laws and how we have to, I mean, not the laws, the pressure on schools for, a lot of statistics. And the other place that we see it is we represent a lot of kids who've been in prison. Right? A lot of our work is helping kids re-enter, and no school wants them.
That's right.
No one wants them. You have a record. You have a record. You have an IEP. You're black. You've been in prison. We can't get you back in school. And if I can't get you back into school, of course, I've already told you you're violating your orders. But forget that. What's going to be your future? If you can't get educated and you can't get a job, what's happening? We also represent juvenile sex offenders, and if you think it's hard for a regular kid who doesn't have that offense, imagine trying to go to school. I had a client who was trying to go to school. It was actually a young girl who had been adjudicated delinquent for a sex offense, and she was going to school, but would they let her go on the field trips? Would they let her participate? So she became completely stigmatized in trying to attend high school because she was not allowed to be in so many different circumstances. And kids like this can't even go back to school, right? So we push them out. Nothing about their record is confidential. That's a myth. We all can experience that, say that. But so what do we do at the Children and Family Justice Center? I've already told you that we represent the kids who are facing these charges and try to get them dismissed, try to get them minimized, try to help them move on. We represent the kids who are trying to re-enter in school. And the other important part about the Children and Family Justice Center is we work with a social worker who helps us on all of these cases. And I think that it's critically, I mean, if you have the luxury of that, when it is a complete luxury, it is a wonderful thing to say. And the other thing I wanted to just say, which is a little bit off the beaten path, but I think it's important, is that we do Know Your Rights training for kids in schools. And I think it's really important. A few years ago, we developed this it's called a zine, not a comic book if you're under 50. And it tells kids about their rights, because I think it's the Gestapo, it's those 2 in every high school in Chicago, people who are posing as police officers, right? And so it's hard to explain to children about their rights in schools because, quite frankly, they don't have very many. But it's important that they know that. It's important that they know when they talk to that person that that's going to be confession. Okay, my time's up. So I'm just going to tell you we do this, and the important thing that we also do is with young people, we have developed a curriculum. It's a 5-part curriculum, and one of our modules is called School to Prison Pipeline, and we're trying to go to as many high schools and elementary schools in the city of Chicago, because that's all we can do, with young people who were previously in the juvenile justice system, being able to give them information about what they should and shouldn't do when they go to school. And for those who talked about parents, I think you mentioned that, we also do it with parents, because I think parents are so, and when I say parents, I actually mean family members, because not everyone has a biological mom or dad, but there is a grown-up in their life. So that's what I really mean. And we do trainings, educational sessions with parents and other family members to help them better understand the rights of their children and how they can sort of, because everyone pushes them out. No one wants to see them, to try and help empower them with knowledge. So if you have free time and want to do that as well, so I've given you 4 things you can do. Teach kids, take a case, fund us to do an educational work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So when we put this program together, we thought it was a great idea, and now I know it was a great idea. Thank you all very much for your expertise and your wisdom and your inspiration, more than I'd say. Thank you especially for your inspiration. We had originally planned that we would do some group conversation and ask some questions from the moderators, but now that I'm observing how many of you are in the room, we're going to change that a little bit. Many of you whom I know have real expertise. Many of you whom I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to meeting, I think do as well. So we'd like to open the conversation now to folks in the room and ask that you comment on work you're doing, work you're familiar with, or ask questions of any of the panelists if you prefer to do that.
If you'll come up to the mic and face the audience so that you can be on the videotape, that would be great. And give us your name. All right. All right. You can take it out if you want to also.
No, it's
face
okay.
it. Okay.
No, Dr. Phil.
Panelists.
Well, I
It's
connected
okay,
with
Terry.
everybody. I'm Terry Brennan. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Juvenile Justice Committee for the ABA Criminal Justice Section. And I'm a New York attorney, not New York City, but upstate New York. And I wanted to share what we had done a couple months ago in New York State. It was partly Governor Cuomo wanted all of the regions in New York to focus on juvenile justice. He's done this in not all, but many aspects of our lives in New York, and said, you know, meet regionally. He did that with juvenile justice. And on this issue, he had webinars. Started, I think it was hosted at Hofstra. And they included experts in the field, and they have many of the same recommendations that we made here. But I think in recognizing Judge who opened today, Judge Hyman, it was hosted by the Division of Criminal Justice Services, who really is responsible, just as the judge said, for this problem, along with many community actors. So it's important that it is hosted and it's voiced by that. It's the system. The system is the problem. So it's important, and I like that was part of this presentation too. And a lot of it is just happens in normal interaction, which Ms. Kaba was talking about. I totally connected with that. And as a prosecutor, I think the message that I got from our program and this one is you have to fight those, something has to be done. That's a lot. You hear that from everybody, teachers to probation. Will you do it for me? Just do something, and our whole system operates on fear. I think that's something that it's hard to address that, but we have to. We have to talk about even the teachers, We're not rewarding the best teachers. We're punishing the worst teachers. And the kids that get in trouble, we're threatening them with something more restrictive. More money goes to the most restrictive treatments of criminals and juveniles than guidance, just guidance at the beginning. How do I engage with this child in the classroom as a teacher, let's say? As an attorney, how do I fix this problem without stomping on everybody involved? That's kind of where we should go with it. And I just wanted to share with you how we address that in New York. And this is right along the same lines, and I think every state should do the same thing. So hopefully that'll happen, but I'm not sure it will. Thanks.
So I'm going to take the liberty of speaking for Terry for 1 second. Having talked to him before about this program that they did in New York, there were results from this. People's behaviors changed after this. And so in some ways, teaching people does work. Yes, ma'am?
Good morning. My name is Erica Robinson. Oh, that's right. Sorry. I'm going to stand here so I can see everyone. My name is Erica Robinson, and I'm a new attorney. I just graduated from law school, and I represent school districts in Georgia. When I was in the second grade, I was misplaced in special education. I was placed in special education because I talked too much. My special education class was all black. That classroom was in Memphis, Tennessee, and we were like in a janitor's closet. And if it wasn't because of my mother who said there's nothing wrong with my child, I don't know where I would have been. And when I think about the school to prison pipeline, special education to prison pipeline, I wonder if there's something we can do with teacher competencies and creating cultural competencies in teacher training programs to assist teachers in better managing their classrooms, better understanding that if a student is loud, that doesn't mean they're gonna attack you. That might be the way that students communicate in their own households. And I just wanted to know what the panel's opinions were about enhancing teacher training, because there's so many stories like mine. Mine occurred before the protections of IDEA. You could just move a kid who got on your nerves. You can't, well, you still can do it, but there are other avenues. There's a little bit more due process required. So what are your thoughts about teacher training and including teacher competency as a part of it?
I think on the teacher training, there's some significant problems. I taught chemistry, yet when students were assigned to my class, I did not know if they needed medication, if they had special needs, issues, and I was never taught that. I was not prepared for a student who entered my classroom that had attention deficit disorder and required a different approach. And I'm dealing with chemicals, so any little thing you do could cause an explosion. Teachers are not being trained properly, and when you try to train me in a year to manage a classroom that is multicultural or very different from my culture, I use my cultural skills to manage the classroom, which may or may not work if my students are Native American, African American. So that is an issue. But the bigger issue is the resource allocation. How do you justify spending, Cook County Jail, just to sit there is $143 a day, $52,000 a year. Juvenile is more than that, and when she says there's no education in juvenile, what are we doing with them? Why are they sitting there? They have a Mother Consuelo York school, and they have an absentee rate. How are you absent in jail? I mean, so clearly, we have no desire to focus on education. We spend $6,000 or less in our school systems here in Illinois and all across the country, and we will incarcerate somebody for $52,000. That's more than the average poor person earns. So I think in teacher training is one thing, and we ought to hire the best people and pay them the most money. Teaching is a profession that should be paid. You can't pay me less than a janitor.
Right.
And expect me to commit my time in the morning, because good teachers prepare early and they prepare late. The years when I went to school, and I'm old, teachers met me at school and they were there when I left. I thought my teacher spent the night. And she looked a certain way. I mean, and they looked at you a certain way. Now you go into, and I'm done, you go into some of these schools, the teachers are in lotus positions on the desk. I mean, just all kind of foolishness, this free spirit, and from a culture of African Americans, we can't do that. We need a certain kind of structures because.
So I want to.
So that's in teacher training.
So I want to say, I taught too, and I want to say it's hard to teach.
It's hard.
It's really hard work to teach, and to teach in this particular environment. And I want to say that training is one thing, but I don't think we'll train our way out of this because the structures are so oppressive. And because right now we're closing schools, and we have had the largest mass closure of schools in the history of the U.S. in Chicago. 50 schools closed. My friends who teach now have 10 to 15 extra students. Can you imagine teaching a high school class of 45?
No.
It's not possible. You're not going to be able to teach. The students can't deal with it. The teachers sure as heck can't. So, whatever we tinker with on the side, while we are now literally it's like a highway robbery situation occurring right now, right? Where we're spending in our state $111,000 per young person that we incarcerate in our Department of Juvenile Justice prisons. $220,000 if you put a kid into our detention center for a year, and we are spending $13,000 to educate them. That's just a matter of what our priorities are and what we've decided. There's money. Clearly, there's cash. The question is, what do you want to spend it on? So I'm for the training pieces. I think our schools of education need to be better. I also think they need to do anti-oppression training, not diversity training. That's a totally different thing. So I think those are totally, we need to push on that. But I don't think we're going to train our way out of this. So that's just the truth, I think we're going to have to do some structural stuff. And I think we're going to have to stop hating teachers. I think we're going to have to stop hating teachers. I can't believe how many politicians get up there and actually succeed by telling us that the teachers suck. Come into a school and sit there for the day. When my friends are literally not able to make photocopies, and they're using the money that they're getting paid this much and they are buying books for their kids and food for their children. Okay, so the bad teachers need to go. But I'm going to tell you, take every bad teacher out of the system won't improve.
Right.
Because we have bigger problems than that. So, I'm just going to put it out there that it is damn hard to teach, and no one is rushing to do it. No. And the people who are doing it are doing their goddamn best.
Yep, I did that for 2 years, too, before law
Oh,
school.
hell, of course.
Worked off C Street in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
If anyone knows anything about the D.C. educational system, you already know.
That's right.
And I worked in a
couldn't
charter
last.
school that was featured in Waiting for Superman. Yeah. And what was on that documentary and what I experienced as a live-in house parent were two totally different things. So I get it.
Yeah.
And being on the side where I represent the man now is kind of a mind warp because I represent districts.
Yeah.
So my job is to go in and advocate why this policy makes sense, why this kid has to get put out, given my history. So it's a very complicated kind of thing to take on. But thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to just say, I think where the disconnect happens, education, I think is right, but our focus monetarily right now in the U.S. is totally backwards from where it needs to be. When you spend $900 billion on military and $56 billion on education, you know exactly where your pipeline's going to go to. We spend more on our prisons than we do on educating our children. And I agree with the 45, one teacher with 45 is a horrible scenario. But what happened was we started downsizing the classrooms and hiring more teachers, but not paying them any more money. That's right. So we gave no more funding, increased the number of teachers, then taking salaries from other teachers, which made it that much more difficult. Everyone's like, oh, now what are you complaining about? It's only 12 people in a classroom. It's so much better. Yeah, but no one can afford to live on the salaries that you do. And I represent a lot of teachers and teachers' unions who are in the same boat, and every year they fight less salary for themselves, less people, less funding. Parents are then having to come in. There needs to be a concerted effort from us, the public, towards our politicians to stop the spending on these useless things that don't do anything to help us and put our money and our time and focus into those programs and those things that are going to change what our futures are going to be. I'm going to highlight your boys. There are 3 young men here today that I had the very fortunate opportunity to speak with at the Legal Prep Academy. And they're young men who are looking at a legal career. And they desperately need cash and money and help and assistance so that their visions, their ideas of what they want to be can become realities. But if they don't get it, then these kids this is our future right here. These young men who are trying to be more than they are going to die. They're going to die on the vine. And so the necessity for them to understand that, number one, they can do it. Number two, we're going to support them, has to come over and over and over again. They can't just come to this thing and hear all this negativity and then go back to school and say, how am I supposed to make it? This system sucks. It's a horrible place to be. You got to inspire them. They need to be inspired. That requires us to do more than we're doing. We have to give back and give back and give back. So we have to change the process and change the funding so that these young men can be sitting up here where we are and helping you with your justice programs.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sure you'd like to go work with them and get them into the system. Mr. Finkelstein, there's your answer right there. All right, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to keep rolling with this same topic. My name is Rachel Gallardo, and I was a Teach for America teacher in North Carolina for 2 years, and then went to work for the organization in Dallas and currently work for them here in Chicago. And so as I'm sitting, that's the lens through which I'm listening and hearing a lot of this information today. And the school to prison or community to prison pipeline is a topic that we are currently discussing with all the teachers in our organization. So I have a 2-part question for the panel. I'd love your opinion on one. As I hear all these things, I'm wondering, like, yeah, this is good, and it's good to build my knowledge on this, and we're working to build our teachers' knowledge on this. But how can we, and what are your recommendations for people who are in classrooms daily, in communities daily? You've got a Teach for America force of 600 teachers here. How can we better educate ourselves on this? How do we ensure and help out communities and parents and teachers learning about their rights in schools? And Julie, I would love about how many ever pamphlets you've got. I plan to email you and ask for them. So what recommendations would you have for us? And just from my own knowledge, you spoke of parents having certain rights and students having certain rights. Within the school system, so we're talking about the security force within the schools, are there certain policies, are there certain, I don't even really know what to call them, are there certain policies by which administration has to hold to, and are there certain things where we can say with the security officers that if people were to see that, we can say, actually, that's outside of your right, you actually cannot do that. So yeah, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts. Thank you.
I think, and I don't believe in Teach for America, just let me say that off the top, because I think that the way you frame the questions really goes to the heart of the matter. You cannot have a school system that has no veteran teachers in it. You cannot have well, you can have a school system, but it won't be effective if the majority of the students are of one culture and the majority of the teachers are of a totally different, detached culture. And part of the Teach for America problem is it suggests that in a period of time, you can do everything that's necessary to provide a high-quality public education to every child. And then they drop you into a school that is inadequately resourced. And so what you need to fight for, those of you who are really visionary and energetic and committed, really, is you can't send me into battle without the appropriate gear and without the appropriate resources. You must demand that there be veteran, wise people that mentor you. We can't have new principals that are not mentored by anyone who has gone the way. Never been there, can't tell been there how to get there.
That's so true.
And you have to just know that. And youth is wasted on the young because you don't have the experience that you need to be as effective as you really want to be. And so I think there needs to be a different training. That BROAD program, you can't have a corporate model for education. Education is really a calling, and teaching is really a calling. And so as we reframe it, I think we have to look at all of these business models that are preparing people to go into our schools. We need to prepare them culturally. They do need to have some business understanding. The products that they're producing have to reach a certain standard. But in order to reach that standard, there has to be equal access to resources, to training, and to technology. And so those are the things we have to fight for. And the ABA, with its tentacles, can help make sure that nationally there is a consistent framework in these state legislatures which require certain things to be for every child. You know, they say we should leave no child behind. Well, the fact of the matter is we're leaving the majority of America's future behind with inadequate resources and poorly prepared teachers. Not talking about you.
If you want to figure out a model kind of discipline code around policing and how to deal with police in schools, we don't have one in Chicago, but the Dignity in Schools campaign has developed one that you can use as a template for your systems. And then a lot of TFA's, teachers are in charters. Charters don't abide by the CPS model. In terms of the student code of conduct, they can have their own. They're actually not even required to tell us what their discipline numbers are in the way that the CPS system is. So there's like different levels within our kind of weird school system that we have here in Chicago in particular, and in Illinois broadly speaking. So I think, encourage you to go to Dignity in Schools, look up that information. I also think that it's really, really important when we're thinking about these issues about education, and it's self-education, that a place like TFA, you guys obviously right now have a lot of resources coming at you from different places. There's a question about what the priorities need to be articulated as in terms of training. Y'all need a totally different training model. Really. I mean, and again, you're not the representative of TFA. This is coming from, the cops and those other folks, Wendy Kopp and that crew. They need to rethink what it means to actually work in urban schools. like from the ground up. I feel it's unfair as hell. I've seen it with my own students. I teach college classes. I see them coming in and recruiting my students who are not ready in any way to be put in after 7 weeks into a school where I'm teaching about urban education, and those poor students, I know they're scared to death. Yeah. I see them in class. They're like, Professor Kaba, we can't do this. And I'm like, oh my God, they're gonna put you in September. You're gonna fail. So 2 years is not enough. 2 years is not enough. They gotta force people in for 5 if they wanna do it, right? I mean, that's a minimum of the time that you need. So we have some serious issues. And while I think, again, I see these young people, they're so wanting to do something positive. So I'm not trying to, like TFA, the problem isn't the youth. The problem is the grown folks who think this process is gonna work, and they know it's not. So I feel really terrible for my students who go into TFA knowing full well what they're gonna deal with when they get into the schools they're gonna send them to. That's a real
Thank you.
problem.
Thank you for the information, and we are working on a new model. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
good.
y'all's perspectives.
Awesome.
Hello, my name is Jessica Johnson, and I have a question for the panel, but before I get into that, I kind of just want to give a brief little overview of who I am, and along with Allie Conley, what we do. We're in New Orleans. We're Tulane Law and Loyola Law students, and what we do is that if a child is, we're with an organization called SUFIO, Stand Up For Each Other, and if a child's been suspended or expelled in the New Orleans area, they give us a call, and we go to their suspension or expulsion hearings. In addition to that, we also perform mediations between teachers and students if need be, and do Know Your Rights trainings in schools within the New Orleans area. So what my question is for you guys, what role do you see law students playing in this bigger picture? I mean, we want to be you guys. That's the goal. So as far as programs or organizations, what role do you see law students playing in, you know, diverting the school to prison pipeline?
Before the panel answers, this organization was highlighted in a PBS special that Tavis Smiley put on, Youth Under Arrest. And so that's how I came to hear about this organization. And when she asked the question, how can we be like you guys? Yeah. The question should be, how can we be like you?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
These are law students who are actually representing students in expulsion hearings, law students, okay? So great question, and I'm going to turn it over to the panel to see what more we can do, and maybe the ABA can help as well.
Well, I want to first start by commending you, because I know when I was a law student, I was like, let me just make it through torts and contracts. And when it came to getting involved in work, I said, how do I begin? But I think one of the things that I've learned from my students is the willingness to reshape the narrative. One thing that I want you to think about, oftentimes we talk about this as a civil rights issue because of some of the disparities, but as we see here already what Miriam had framed about looking at this holistically, there's more at stake here related to our communities, related to disenfranchisement. I mean, this is a multi-layered and faceted issue, a social justice issue. So with that, I would challenge you to think about how you're framing it. My students, as we've talked about, I said, maybe this is truly a human rights issue. Why is America not signed on to the UN Convention for Children's Rights? What would that mean? That children have right to shelter, food, and protection? Oh my goodness, and education? So also think about, be a visionary and reframe this conversation for us. And I think the other piece is raise awareness. Even amongst your student body. One of the things that our students do is annually they do like a CLE and a workshop to bring our alumni in, bring other students to talk about what they're working on. Like for now, they're working on the Prison Phone Justice campaign. I said, what does that mean? There's a problem with the high cost of prison phone calls? Yes. In Minnesota, a 15-minute phone call is almost $20. So how do we stand up for the 15,000 children in Minnesota, the 2.7 million nationally, who have an incarcerated parent? I mean, I couldn't imagine having an incarcerated parent and no connection, no means to be connected. So I think reframing the narrative, it would be one piece, and then looking at these issues largely. And then lastly, one of the things that I became a lawyer, I told myself, because I can barely add and subtract, accounting was my other issue to consider. But truly, follow the money. In Minnesota, in juvenile detention facility, it costs over $300 a day for our children to be housed there. But yet then we did our research, and with Annie E. Casey Foundation, with the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, we were offering better opportunities that cost about $60 a day. But all of a sudden we have resistance. And it's like, how does that work? Couldn't we take that $300 and reinvest and uplift a family out of poverty? So I think ask those critical questions, and a big piece of it is me with my reading glasses going through the data and looking at the numbers and showcasing the numbers to show that if we take a holistic approach to uplift families out of poverty, to offer access to employment, to deal with these mass incarceration issues, we can reinvest that money to prevent crime and build a stronger America. But truly, we have to follow the money and hold people accountable to where that money's going. With $70 billion going into corrections, and we can't answer for why don't children have access to books, scholarships. These are things that make you say, so follow the money and the data and reshape that narrative with it.
Can I ask you, you're in New Orleans?
Yes.
Right, and the students that you end up appearing before, what types of schools do they go to? Public or charter?
Charter schools.
Both, but we've
Mostly
seen
charters.
mostly charters.
And the reason I asked that was because after Katrina, there was a sharp
Huge
change
shift.
in the way the New Orleans school system was run. They decided, it's the Milton Friedman economic approach, which you profit off of tragedy is
Exactly.
basically what it is. And they decided that we should run schools like a business for profit down there. I don't know what the statistics are for you, but I know that there was a shift where there was like 120 odd public schools, and almost immediately it went down to like 7.
Right.
And then everybody else became a charter school, and vouchers came in. And then the charter schools had like 10 kids per teacher, but the public schools had like 30 or 40.
Right.
And the funding wasn't there. So I don't know if you have a statistic to see the success or failure of that, but it seemed to me that a lot of the low-performing students who were even at the charter schools were being dumped out of the charter schools and sent to the public schools, where they were getting even less education, less assistance, because there was less money for them. And then they privatized the school board too, I believe, didn't they?
Exactly.
So do you see majority of your students or the people you're dealing with, are they in the charter schools or the public schools where the problems are happening?
We actually see overwhelmingly a lot of charter school students. We kind of call it the charter takeover in New Orleans. They've literally taken over our local school boards. Parents have no say whatsoever what
There's
goes
no
on in the
community
school.
schools anymore.
No
There's
community
nothing-
input, nothing. And it's completely decentralized. So when a charter school kicks a child out, essentially, you can't make them accept that child again. And you can't make another charter school accept that child. And so, you know, the nation is sort of applauding this charter school movement and saying that it's wonderful and okay.
This is a Reaganomics.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful because
Read Naomi's book, The Shock Doctrine, and you'll understand exactly what's going on in New Orleans and how horrific it is. And as a model for the country, what's happening is people are simply saying, the wealthy can get educated, and everybody else, we just won't worry about them. And the problem kids, will throw them out there, not fund them, and we'll figure it out later. And that's becoming a cookie cutter across the country right now. It's very scary.
it's very scary.
Well, I think as law students, you must keep graduation in focus. And I think what you can do is share the information through articles that you circulate within the various bar journals and being at the ABA and other bar associations, so that you begin to communicate what you're finding and provide a research for the state legislators and others and those who shape public policy, as you are beginning to do so that you begin to frame yourself as someone who is a public advocate, and being very careful not to in any way damage your ability to graduate from law school and to be able to take the bar, but begin to share the information. Because you have, this is a rich opportunity for you, and many students don't take advantage of having these kinds of experiences while in law school. I worked for, who is now a sitting judge while I was in law school, Judge Arnett Hubbard, and it really shaped my thinking and my practice, because she made me work on real life situations, and so the law was always living for me. And so in your instance, the law becomes real to you, because you have to apply those principles that seem very foreign while you're in law school. So I congratulate you.
I just say two things to you. First of all, I think it's fantastic what you're doing, and I'm going to connect you with my student who's sitting right there, Kelsey Green, because I think that one of the things that you should do, I don't know, are you doing this as part of a clinic, or is this just a project on your own?
It's a project. We're being sponsored by the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana, but we're
Right.
JJPL. Yeah.
Right. JJPL. Well, I think that one of the things you could do is talk to other law students, because I think that this is a project that every law student should be involved in around the country. I mean, I talked about access to justice as one of the most important things that we can do as law students and lawyers, and you don't have to be a lawyer to do these kinds of hearings. And so I think that's critically important, and I think you should show your model to every law school. I don't know how you do it, but I think you should do that, because that would be incredible.
They
And I
could,
think-
you could do the law students ABA section here
There you
and put it through that, and then they could get it out to the rest of
There's
the
a
divisions.
there's a lot of places I'm sure you could. And the second thing that I'm going to suggest is I sit on our state advisory group, which is our Juvenile Justice Commission in the state of Illinois. And I know every state is required to have one, a state advisory group. I don't know what it is in New Orleans, but I think you need to connect with them, because they are the avenue that the Reverend is talking about to have your information given to your General Assembly, your governor, and to have it distributed widely. And they also have some money. So I think that it's something that you should connect with your state advisory group.
Last thing I would say
And
also,
Kelsey.
you should write a report
Yes.
about what you're seeing in the charters
Yes.
in New Orleans that we then can use here in Chicago and in all the other places in the country to show what the hell is going on around discipline and charterization. Like, if we turn into New Orleans, this is what we can look forward to. Like, really, I think that would be a huge, huge thing, that if you could then take all the data, the anecdotal evidence, the stuff you guys are seeing in New Orleans, and JJPL and all the great folks there who I know, they let them make sure that they can give you a few dollars so you can do that report for us,
Well,
right?
and also
That would
I
be
think
awesome.
the state advisory group could issue it. I mean, that's why I think you should connect with them, because they can issue reports
Right.
and have the stamp of objectivity and, government authority and,
Though I don't care about that, but I think that you should, I don't care. I mean, I think if you put out the report and it'll go out, it'll be viral.
So, before we go on, I wanted to pick up just for a second on what Julie said, introducing you to her law student. I think there are other law students in the room now, and I would ask all of you, when we break up, to please introduce yourselves to these women who've come up from New Orleans and their colleague. They have a third colleague here with them. So I'd like to just take a second to make sure that connection happens. And now, Sam, leader of a charter school, I know you're dying to be next, but I'd like to invite the gentleman standing behind you to be next, because he was waiting in the other line all this time.
Yeah, the original line, but that's okay.
What can I say?
It's all right. I'm pretty patient. So I'm a veteran teacher of 18 years here in Chicago. I currently work for the Chicago Teachers Union as Walter Taylor. Yes, I'm right here.
Rachel was looking for you, yeah.
So I'm the professional development facilitator for the union, which basically means I design courses and I teach courses, but I also do a lot of other things. First of all, there's so much that I want to say. I'm going to narrow it down, though. But I'm so happy to hear some of the comments that I've heard, like saying things like, we should have veteran teachers. Thank you for that. I mean, that is huge, because we know what's going on in Chicago and New Orleans. When you do write that report, absolutely send it to us, because we are fighting. We are fighting, and we're going to need that as ammo, so definitely get that to us. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that I am doing some work with restorative justice and for high schools. This is eye-opening to me, being a veteran teacher for 18 years. I guess I didn't have the language of restorative justice, and I'm now learning it through this work that I'm currently doing. It is very powerful. And the part that I like about it the most is that it's this thing of doing with students opposed to doing to. We are always imposing things upon students, which is part of the problem, which is why students don't like school sometimes, is because it's like the sit and get. That does not work. Like, we have to involve them. It is their education. So I'm learning through restorative justice that that's an opportunity for students to begin to shape their own lives and their own choices. This is huge. And then they want to come to school. And then magically, as people like to say, and it's not magic, but magically, the behavior issues go down. And of course, there are structural issues that are bigger than anything. But if you're on the ground, like a person like me, in the schools working, restorative justice certainly is an answer, it's part of an answer, it's a vehicle to get someplace. So I really am interested in having a conversation with my colleague up there after this is all over. All right, thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I know there's not a lot of love up there for charter schools, but my name is...
But you are everyone's exception, Sam. You are everyone's
I love it.
exception.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. My name is Sam Finkelstein. I am CEO and founder of Legal Prep Charter Academy. We are a newer charter high school here in Chicago in our second year of operations. So we have freshmen and sophomore students. We have 3 of our freshmen that are here today with us. I also want to thank the ABA Judicial Division for coming out, visiting with our students. Robert was part of the delegation that came out. We had 30 lawyers and judges that were out, and it was just a wonderful experience for our kids, I know. But there's a lot of really great work being done on this issue, and I think it's such an important topic, and I think a lot of times some of this gets lost in the charter versus non-charter debate. But when we're on the ground, we're all working towards the same thing. We have the same goals. We want students that are in school and not on the way to the prison pipeline. So I think we're all working towards the same goal ultimately. And I really came up to speak on one sort of very narrow topic, and I was mentioned up there, and I know the topic was about the police officers that are stationed in all Chicago high schools. While that might be true of the traditional high schools, at our charter school, we do not have police officers that are stationed at our charter school. We do not have metal detectors when you walk through our doors. Our population, it mirrors that of the neighborhood high school. We are open enrollment. Any person who wants to come to our school is welcome to come to our school. The academic levels of incoming students mirror that of the neighborhood school. So there are similarities across the board, but what we do is different. And the reason why we cannot have police officers is the reason why I would never suggest that our neighborhood high school do the same thing that we do right off the bat. It's a process. You need things in place in order to do that. We have things in place. We have a conflict resolution program that was designed by a former Northwestern law professor, and that we train our students on the first week they come in the building. They know where the mediation forms are. There are 6 trained mediators in our building. We have restorative justice. Every single teacher in our building has been trained by one of the deans from Fenger High School, which is a regular traditional Chicago public school. So there are some partnerships going on between charters and non-charters, but they're trained in peace circles and restorative processes. You have to have that in place. You can't just pull security out of schools and magically think that everything is going to be fine, because it's not going to be. I think we need to get there, and that's why when we created the model that we have, we never were going to have metal detectors. We never were going to have police officers. But I think that it has to come together in a process with additional training, with additional resources that are so important that we don't see at some of our neighborhood schools. And we're all about trying to share what we're doing with neighborhood schools. And I think that has to be the model. I think what's happening in New Orleans, I don't believe that that's the goal. That's, at least from my perspective, that's not the goal. To create a system where it's just charters, there's no traditional public schools. Charters are supposed to be incubation grounds where you can breed best practices that are shared with other schools. Now there hasn't been enough of that being done. And I think that there has to be much, much more, but that's what I think the role is of charters, and I hope that what we'll see as we move down the line is we can eliminate this police presence, because it's devastating. The number of school issued arrests that happen, it's so problematic, and these are issues, like we said on the panel, that can be handled in a principal's office and not at the police station, and we need to go in that direction where that is eliminated, it's not an institutional feel when you walk through the doors of an educational institution.
Thanks, Sam.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lourdes Rosado, and I wanted to thank the panel for giving a lot of rich information that I'm about to hopefully add some information to things and tools that touched upon so many of the things that you all talked about. First is that I really, one of my roles is as co-chair of the Children's Rights Litigation Committee of the section of litigation of the ABA. And we have an educational civil rights accountability project that also believes, as Professor Heidsieck, is that how you pronounce your name? This is really important what's here. This is an important point in time, because we have like the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education really taking a leadership role on this. And one of the things that my committee is doing through this accountability project is offering training to pro bono attorneys to work with community groups to file complaints of racial and ethnic disparate impact with the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education that will prompt. What that does is it's not a court process, but it prompts an investigation process where the Department of Education goes out and investigates the school and then imposes a plan of remedial action on the school. So that's one very concrete thing that a bunch of the attorneys here can do, is get involved in getting that kind of training to work with and represent community groups in filing those complaints with the Department of Education. We need to be using the federal law more. And frankly, I mean, the folks in these, this is a unique period of time, and I don't want to miss it before the administration changes. The OCR is basically begging us to file these kinds of complaints. We should be doing that aggressively. The second thing I wanted to touch on was something that Professor Tyner talked about, and it's great, about the issue of expungement and juvenile records. The myth that A, juvenile records are not accessible when kids are kids, that's totally false, and B, that they somehow like disintegrate like that Mission Impossible tape or when they turn 18, both false. And we need to A, be doing more aggressive work on getting kids' records expunged under current law, and then better improving our expungement and juvenile records laws. So to that end, my committee is doing a webinar on March 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on juvenile records and expungement. It's free for ABA members. It's not free for non-ABA members, but we're gonna videotape it and put it up on our website. So 2, 3, I wanted to touch on something that Julie said about state advisory groups. As she said, each state under federal law has to have the state advisory group that that basically is in charge of distributing federal and state juvenile justice dollars. We're talking a lot about stopping the pipeline from the source, but there's also a role for the juvenile justice system to play to push it back or divert that pipe. Right? We don't have to be taking these kids in the juvenile justice system. And frankly, there are, as Professor Kaba said, there are law enforcement officers who don't want to be arresting kids. Probation officers and judges are like, I can't believe the schools are calling us with these things. This is ridiculous. We have, rapists out there and arsonists who we need to deal with, not with the kid who threw the pen out of the school bus. So and I sit on my state SAG and chair a diversion subcommittee that's now looking at, well, let's take these federal monies and put out solicitations for people to start diversion programs to divert kids who are referred by the schools. We want to be doing that. We can push back. We don't have to, the justice system does not have to take these kids. They can say no. And so we want to start using those resources. And the fourth and final thing is going back to what the young woman who was from Teach for America, she's still here. I'm talking a little bit more concretely about what we can do in the schools today. One thing that I look at a lot, especially with police presence in schools, is I'm sort of astounded at how much information schools are sharing with the police, frankly, in violation of federal law. There is a federal law, FERPA, that protects the privacy of student information, and it puts very strict limits on who can see that information and gives parents very, much control over seeing that information. But a lot of that information is legally being given to police and district attorneys to prosecute kids. And so in school, one of the things you can look at very concretely in your school are school administrators and teachers giving information about kids to police officers, to district attorneys, that is then in turn being used to prosecute them, because you can make complaints then, and I've seen this, to the Federal Department of Education to say this school is violating the law, and have the Department of Education ding them. At least it's not a huge thing, but to have the Department of Education say, you are violating the law, you can't do this anymore. Again, it pushes back on the culture. Those are my 4 bits.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go on, there's been a fair amount of talk about the new federal guidelines, and I want folks to know that we have copies of them here with us for you. Rachel's bringing them in now, and all of us, I think, are happy to talk about that in questions or after we break up here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jessica Schneider. I'm a staff attorney at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We've had the pleasure working with Miriam Kaba on the push to try to get CPS to be more transparent about their discipline data, which we've been able to make a lot of progress on. But I just wanted to say that we run a program where we have pro bono volunteers for expulsion hearings, and we're always looking for more volunteers. I've also volunteered at Legal Prep Charter School, and I was at their fundraiser last night, which was a lot of fun. But we have a hard time, trying to get the word out, making sure students know that they do have a right to an attorney and a representative here at expulsion hearings. We work in CPS, also at charter schools, and occasionally in suburban school districts where the need is often even greater to have a representative and that right to due process. The volunteers have a great experience. They always are calling me and telling me all these, they can't believe this is how it works, and that a prosecutor would never be able to do this. And I have to explain that it's not the same. But they find it really rewarding, and we would be interested too in seeing a model school code that builds in that right and lets everyone know that they have the right to representation. And then I'm going to let Candace follow that up briefly.
Hi, my name is Candace Moore, and I'm a fellow with the Chicago Lawyers Committee with our Educational Equity Project. And I just sort of want to give a note to all the current law students, as I am a recent graduate of Loyola Law School. And during law school, I was reading all the reports that were put out by Mariam Kaba and other community organizations about School to Prison Pipeline. And for me, that's where sort of this idea started, and I really wanted to get into this work. So I've been fortunate to be with the Lawyers Committee in their Educational Equity Project. And actually the project started when I was an intern there, and there was an assignment to write a memo on what the Lawyers Committee could do in terms of education. So just an encouragement to law students out there who really want to get involved in this work. It can happen. There are many organizations out there that want to do this work, and you can't be creative. You have a lot of resources as a law student, and you can really begin to get into the field and get into the community and make that change. So it's great to hear about the organizations that are already doing that, and I just encourage Chicago students to continue to do the same things.
And if anyone wants more information or is interested in volunteering, we are happy to give it, and it's a much needed service, so we definitely rely on our pro bono volunteers.
Thank you, but ladies, very much.
Well, I want to thank everyone for their comments. And what we want to do right now, because we do need to wrap up, even though this conversation is not going to stop, but this program, we do need to wrap up. What I'd like to do is, because the panel's been sitting up here, they have a wealth of knowledge. And if you can just kind of do a closing. I'll give everyone just a minute, if we can do that. I'm sorry
Condense your
that we
lives
have to
into
do
1
that.
minute.
Yeah, but just kind of a closing comment, and then we'll wrap it up. And everyone will be here to talk more and get to know who's here after this program.
Well, many of us will be here. I already hear some of us won't, but we will circulate a list, and you will know how to get in touch with other people.
So, Nancy?
I went back to my Angela Davis quote here that I kind of breezed by initially. The most difficult and urgent challenge of today is that of creatively exploring new terrains of justice where the prison no longer serves as the major anchor, okay? And I think that theme has been expressed here in a number of ways today. Certainly there's larger cultural questions about our collective social investment in criminalization, the role really of anti-blackness in that. I'm grateful for Mariam just naming that. So lots of work to do. Certainly, I'm grateful again to the ABA. All of you have all kinds of legal tools at your disposal, and there's been a lot of great suggestions here today about how to use them. I am going to reiterate the message about the significance of the federal guidelines and just say that for every kind of positive action that we can take to change thinking and imagine new alternatives, a lot of the changes, Minneapolis School has just changed their disciplinary policy. I could list a number of cities. But looming in the background of that is the thought that the Department of Justice was going to bring a civil rights action against them, just like they did with Meridian, Mississippi, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, the law for positive, the law for negative, I guess, or in a punitive way. All kinds of ways to think about this, all kinds of tools for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Robert.
Thank you again for having us. I'll leave you with a couple personal thoughts. I was very fortunate in the Native American population that I had a grandmother who continued to tell me it wasn't a question of whether I was going to go to college or not, it was what college was I going to go to. And that was continually repeated over and over and over again in my household. So the ideas of moving forward from the reservation to a life outside the reservation, which was very counterculture, was something that was taught all the way. And she made sure that I understood that the one thing that no one could ever take from me, and I'm sure you've all heard this, is that once you have that education, that knowledge, that degree, it can't be taken from you ever. That's the one thing. They can take your freedom, they can take your rights, they can beat you down, but the one thing they will never take is your education. And whether we like to admit it or not, this is our problem, and we are going to be the solution. And so I'll leave you just with one quote that I try and live, and I tell my children to live by is, I know I'm only one, and I can't do everything, but because I'm one and I can't do everything, I'm not going to refuse to do the something that I can do. So everyone in here, you're just one, but you can do something. So go do that something that you can do, and that'll make the difference. Thanks.
For me, I think I would conclude with where I began, of this essence of our children being our future. So thinking about how we're protecting and bringing forth a promise that will help them to be able to strive and thrive in their daily lives. For me as a lawyer, I think it's also a question related to policy. So in training my law students, I'm excited to talk to the other law students related to policy entrepreneurship, reshaping the narrative. When there's bad policies, can we gather as the advice that we heard for possible solutions, the information related to some of the disparities that we're seeing, and offer recommendations for change. I think that's also the essence of what we do in the Community Justice Project, by educating the community about the civil rights issues that we see, and also mobilizing the community and letting the community be at the forefront. Because I think oftentimes the temptation for lawyers is to say, I'm super lawyer on the scene, you step back, let me take care of this. But really bringing community members and young people and parents to the forefront to build a meaningful coalition to really bring forth a change related to the issue of the school to prison pipeline. And then the last thing that I would leave you with is, for me, just this constant journey of looking at and following the money, as I advise the law students as well. One of the themes from the Children's Defense Fund is be careful what you cut, and looking at how we're investing our dollars, where we're cutting the dollars, and where we're going to see in the future then the ramifications for diminishing the investment in education as well.
So I'm just so gratified that so many people are here and that so many of you actually stayed, that you didn't run from the room after hearing what we all had to say. That sounds super depressing, but it's not, right? Because we need everybody. And I think everybody in this room has something to be able to contribute in a positive way that will help us to be able to interrupt this pipeline. And as I said, I think for me, there's points at every level of intervention where somebody can do something different. And my hope is that we all start thinking about what we can do differently than what we've been doing to contribute to this huge mass incarceration and epidemic that we have in this country. A mass incarceration epidemic that's supremely racialized, addressed around class, addressed around, kind of heterosexism and the ways in which trans people are being criminalized within the system, and trans youth in particular, here in the city of Chicago. So I'm excited to continue to think about ways that we're going to be able to do this work in a holistic, better, more focused, less punitive way than we've been doing it. And so restorative justice, for what it can do in the ways that it can do it, I think are important. I just don't want continued co-optation of what we're trying to do to become now an arm of the state. And I think that's what I'm seeing. And I've been doing RJ work for a very, very long time before when nobody cared about what it was. And now that so many people care about what it is, and particularly so many of people who have power in state ways to be able to punish, now are glomming on. I just want to remind us again that it's not meant to be, I think the judgment of whether or not we're making a difference is whether you actually shorten the reach of the prison industrial complex, not extend it. So I don't want new ways of criminalizing people that are now ankle bracelets rather than being caught up in prison. Ankle bracelets are better than being jailed, but they're still confinement and surveillance. And I'm worried about the fact that now, because money is of issue, we're just trying to find new ways to continue to criminalize people, and they're all going to be the same people who look like me, right? So I'm real concerned. And I feel like, you know, your judgment is for any new intervention that they offer you, you should ask the question, is it shortening the reach of the prison industrial complex or expanding it? If the answer is expanding it, it's a bad thing. That's just like the basic knowledge, the basic question. And every single time I hear a new intervention, when it's expanding the reach in new and more insidious ways, you want to say no. I don't care if it's cheaper. I don't care if it seems more nice. That's not the point. Our job is to interrupt the system completely, dismantle it, bring in some new healthy ways of interaction. Thanks.
I think the only thing I would add to it, because I think I agree with what everyone said, is two things. One is that, as I said before, I think we have to think long and hard that we are punishing children for disobedience by keeping them out of school. No child should be kept out of school. And so I think that for each of you, which I'm assuming a lot of you are lawyers or law students because we're at the ABA, that we've given you a million ideas about whether it's expulsion hearings, suspension hearing, writing policy papers, you know, doing restorative justice in an appropriate way. There's something for every single person, every lawyer, and any community that you're in. Here in Chicago, we've talked about LAF, Loyola, Northwestern, the Chicago Committee for the Civil Rights. I think that was what it's called. Sorry. So there's just a million things, and I'm sure there's a million things in each of everyone's communities. So everyone should do one thing, help one child stay in school and out of prison.
I think the final thing that I would say is that this question of what happens to our children is a human rights issue. And we must really, each of us individually, look at how we reshape America's position on children, because how we treat children will determine how we treat the rest of the world. And the fact that we are pushing our children into a prison industrial complex suggests that we care more about the products that prisons produce and prisoners produce than the product that we have and investing in our children. So each of us, whether we're law students, lawyers, or social workers, or public interest personalities, we need to challenge the media as to how they project images of our children in this music and in the sitcoms that we see. We must challenge the community organizations and churches and faith leaders to open up the doors of our community resource centers for children. Latchkey kids can be supervised by the clergy, and they can become homework centers and not be closed throughout the week. We have to change how we view what needs to happen for our children. And then certainly we have to remove this idea that businesses can make profits from the educational system without providing a high-quality public education for every child. And so, you know, charters have some positives and some negatives. The reality is we must begin to focus, like Finland does, on training teachers to teach every child wherever they meet them, and to make sure that every school has the same quality of resources and materials that every other school has. And then before we push children into a criminal system, we need to push them into a loving setting that allows them to understand the consequences of negative behavior. And I think that we have the possibility, we have the potential, we have to have the commitment. And I think the ABA, in at least convening us, has demonstrated a forward step, but it has to go beyond the dialogue. We have to really pull ourselves together beyond our individual silos and comfort levels and say, what does it take to change the laws in these states? Just as many people did when they set up the Stand Your Ground laws. 27 states didn't do it without a collective action. We need to take a collective action to protect and preserve the rights of children.
All right, well, I want to thank the panel for their presentation.